I did not wear this uniform to impress the world. I wore it to honor those who can no longer speak for themselves.
President Ibrahim Traoré. On the morning of July 29, 2025, silence fell before the storm. 50 soldiers in Burkina Faso, stationed at a remote post in the eastern corridor, lost their lives in a sudden and devastating ambush. No warning, no time to fight back, just a break in the signal, and then everything changed. This was not an accident. The precision of the strike, the timing, and the communications blackout have raised one question across villages, marketplaces, and diplomatic halls alike. Was this terrorism or something more calculated? For President Ibrahim Traoré, this was not just a moment of mourning. It was a moment of awakening. And his response did not come in the form of condemnation. It came in action determined, deliberate, and unmistakably African. If you believe that the time has come for the continent to write its own story, not in anger, but in dignity, stay with us. Because what happened in Burkina Faso may soon be remembered not just as a tragedy, but as the spark of something far greater. Burkina Faso is a land rich in history, minerals, and resilience. But for decades, its story has been told through the lens of dependency, not because of a lack of strength, but because of the weight of expectation from beyond its borders. Gold, uranium, and rare earth elements lie beneath its soil. These are not just commodities. They are the backbone of global industries, the circuits in smartphones, the cores of electric vehicles, the fuel for nuclear power. And yet, for all this wealth, the people of Burkina Faso have often been left with dust. Why? The answer lies not only in the contracts and policies, but in a deeper structure, one where nations like Burkina Faso were expected to receive security from abroad instead of building it at home. Where institutions prioritized stability over sovereignty, where leaders were often celebrated abroad for their cooperation, even if it meant compromising their people's aspirations. President Ibrahim Traoré emerged from a generation shaped not by foreign summits, but by the realities of conflict resource extraction and a youth demanding answers. Rising through the ranks, not as a politician, but as a soldier, Traoré represented something different, a quiet refusal to accept that development must always come with conditions. In the months leading up to the July 29th attack, he had already begun to chart a new course. He declined invitations to Western forums, redirected state funds toward domestic security programs, and challenged the narrative that military aid must come with strings attached. He believed, and still does, that Burkina Faso must define its own future with its own tools, its own people, and its own voice. But choices like these come at a cost. And in a world where strategic interests often shape headlines and alliances, any nation that chooses a path of self-determination must be prepared for challenges. For many watching closely, the attack that claimed the lives of 50 soldiers was not just an act of terror. It felt like a warning, not just to Traoré, but to any leader who dares to step outside the expected script. Burkina Faso had made its decision, and that decision would test not only its resolve, but the resolve of Africa itself. The attack came before dawn. July 29th, 2025, Eastern Burkina Faso. 50 soldiers, trained, disciplined, and loyal, stationed at a strategic outpost near the country's volatile frontier, were taken without a chance to defend themselves. It wasn't the kind of ambush that comes with noise. It came in silence, and that's what made it so devastating. The first indication something was wrong came not from the soldiers on the ground, but from their absence. Communications suddenly went dark. Surveillance drones, normally on 24-hour cycles, stopped transmitting. Backup teams reported signal loss, and by the time reinforcements arrived, they found only scorched earth and still uniforms. This wasn't just war. This was precision. The people of Burkina Faso reacted with disbelief, but not confusion. Many knew what it looked like when war arrived from the shadows. They'd seen it before in Mali, in Niger, in Libya. In stories their elders told of conflicts where the battlefield was only one part of the struggle. The other part, the part harder to detect, moved through policy briefings, foreign aid meetings, and intelligence agreements. In markets and prayer circles, on radio shows and university campuses, a single question echoed: who wanted this to happen, and why? Just days before the ambush, President Ibrahim Traoré had quietly turned down two high-profile invitations from the West. One was from Washington, an offer to attend an international awards event highlighting emerging leaders in African governance. Many at home saw the invite as ceremonial at best and strategic at worst. Traoré declined. The second visit was more discreet. A delegation from a major Western-backed foundation, known for funding security partnerships, arrived in Ouagadougou, hoping to build cooperation. They were not received. Traoré's response was consistent. Burkina Faso was not for sale. Not its land, not its leadership, and not its future. That's what makes the timing of the attack so difficult to ignore. For a nation determined to stand on its own, the loss of 50 soldiers wasn't just a national tragedy. It felt to many like a signal, a reminder of the risks that come with choosing independence over alignment. But this time, something changed. Instead of fear, Burkina Faso responded with resolve. The images from the state funeral, President Traoré in fatigues, standing among grieving families, his head bowed, were broadcast not as symbols of defeat, but as a declaration. We stand together. In the days that followed, something even more unexpected began to take shape, not in the halls of foreign embassies, but in a forgotten factory in the outskirts of the capital. A team of Burkinabè engineers and technicians, many of them recent graduates, began working around the clock to develop a new kind of defense, one that would not rely on foreign shipments or international permissions. They were building drones, surveillance, reconnaissance, precision, each one assembled locally. No imports, no donations. Every bolt, every code line, every algorithm, Burkinabè. Traoré had ordered it quietly but decisively. Never again will we be caught off guard. The factory became more than a defense facility. It became a sanctuary of purpose. Young people who once saw engineering as a path out of the country were now using their skills to defend it. Retired military specialists returned as mentors. Blacksmiths, mechanics, software developers all worked together. They weren't just producing machines. They were producing sovereignty. Security around the site was strict. Armed patrols, no-fly zones, data encryption. But the atmosphere inside was almost sacred. Those who entered the space knew what they were part of, not just a military project, but a national promise. Soon, 2 prototype drone squadrons were in flight patrolling borders and gathering real-time data. Not to attack, but to watch, to prepare, to ensure that what happened on July 29th would never happen again. This wasn't revenge. It was renewal. Across Burkina Faso, the mourning continued. But grief had transformed. It was no longer passive. It had purpose. People who had never considered joining the armed forces began applying for training. Women organized community patrols. Artists painted murals of the fallen, not as victims, but as guardians. And in the background, one truth remained: someone somewhere had tried to send a message. Burkina Faso had answered not with fear, but with readiness. For followers of Africa, this was a moment of rare clarity. Not because it revealed who was behind the attack, but because it revealed something even more powerful, that in the face of pressure, isolation, and loss, Burkina Faso had not collapsed. It had awakened. In the wake of the attack, the world waited for Burkina Faso to stumble, for its young president to call for help, for the flag of sovereignty to be lowered in exchange for offers of security from outside powers. That call never came. Instead, exactly 48 hours after the ambush, a different kind of arrival took place, quiet, efficient, and without ceremony. A Russian military aircraft touched down at Ouagadougou's international airbase. There were no press cameras, no handshake photo ops. But what stepped off that plane marked a shift that global analysts had not anticipated. 200 Russian military advisors disembarked, not as private contractors, not as foreign operators, but as uniformed trainers, specialists in drone warfare, battlefield communications, and border defense. They brought jamming equipment, thermal imaging systems, encrypted comms, and most importantly, an offer that respected one key principle: Burkina Faso would lead. They would assist. This was not the same old playbook. There were no new bases, no flags planted in foreign soil, no strings attached. Traoré had made it clear from day one Burkina Faso would welcome partnerships, but only on its own terms. And now those terms were being tested and honored. Within a week, joint drills began in the region of Kaya. Over 800 Burkinabè troops trained alongside Russian instructors in field exercises that simulated border incursions, drone-assisted reconnaissance, and urban response scenarios. Intelligence sharing protocols were developed with neighboring Mali and Niger. Military observers from both countries took part not as spectators, but as allies. For years, Burkina Faso had been cast as a country on the receiving end of military strategy. Suddenly, it was helping shape one. Soon after, sources inside the presidential office confirmed the development of 5 operational drone squadrons, each with 12 unmanned aerial vehicles capable of flying up to 1,000 kilometers and capturing high-altitude data. 2 of those squadrons were already conducting live surveillance on the eastern and northern borders, relaying real-time intelligence to newly fortified command centers in Ouagadougou. But this was more than just hardware. It was doctrine. Together with Russian advisors, Burkina Faso's defense ministry drafted a strategic framework one President Traoré would later refer to as the African Doctrine of Retaliation. This doctrine did not call for escalation. It called for preparation. It emphasized 4 pillars: self-reliance, build military capacity with indigenous resources; community defense, train civilians in tactical awareness, not militarization; economic resilience, shield; critical infrastructure from external control, narrative protection. Ensure the story of the nation is told by its own people. For the people of Burkina Faso, this doctrine was not radical. It was logical. It was overdue. For some outside observers, however, it was a cause for concern. The idea that a small landlocked African country could defy the traditional cycle aid dependency, debt repeat, and instead create a locally rooted security model that was disruptive. By mid-August, media reactions from abroad began to shift. In Washington, think tanks issued emergency assessments on Sahel destabilization. NATO flagged Burkina Faso as a growing node in a non-aligned military axis. The European Union expressed concern over Burkina Faso's drift from democratic norms, though no evidence of anti-democratic behavior was cited. In Paris, the tone was sharper. A flood of editorials emerged, questioning President Traoré's leadership. Allegations of mismanagement, anonymous sources, stories hinting at fractures within his administration. But inside Burkina Faso, a different story was being written, one that the people themselves were shaping. At a town hall in Fadangorma, farmers asked not for foreign protection, but for training in drone spotting and early warning systems. At a university in Bobo Dioulasso, engineering students began adapting consumer drone kits for tactical purposes. In Ouagadougou, a group of artists launched a project to paint the silhouettes of each fallen soldier on public buildings as both tribute and warning. This wasn't militarization. This was mobilization. Across the country, the phrase, "We will not be caught off guard," began appearing on poster school walls and community centers. It wasn't about fear. It was about awareness, dignity, agency. For decades, African nations have been told to rely on others for safety, that true defense could only come from distant capitals. But Burkina Faso was demonstrating something different, that security can be homegrown, that grief can fuel innovation, and that partnership does not have to mean submission. Burkina Faso didn't set out to make a geopolitical statement. It set out to survive. But in doing so and choosing to build rather than beg, it has become a symbol, not of confrontation, but of confidence, not of isolation, but of self-definition. The message was clear: if Burkina Faso could do this, others could too. And that perhaps was the most revealing truth of all. The loss of 50 soldiers could have fractured the spirit of a young nation. It could have created fear, sparked confusion, or driven people into retreat. But what happened instead was something that even Burkina Faso's strongest supporters hadn't fully predicted. Within 10 days of the July 29th attack, military recruitment offices across the country saw a 60% increase in enlistment applications. In remote northern provinces, young men traveled for days on foot to reach registration centers. In urban areas, long lines formed outside defense buildings as students, farmers, shopkeepers, even school teachers volunteered for service. And this time, it wasn't just men. Women stepped forward too, not only to assist in logistics or healthcare, but to train for frontline roles. Civil society groups organized combat readiness seminars, while local churches, mosques, and traditional councils offered their spaces for public defense workshops. The idea wasn't to build an army. It was to build a citizenry prepared to stand. President Ibrahim Traoré responded swiftly, unveiling a new strategy, Operation Kulpelgo, named after a historic word, meaning the shield of the people. Kulpelgo wasn't just about military strength. It was about national consciousness. At its core were 4 bold initiatives. Civilian defense training. Every administrative region would house a People's Preparedness Center, where locals could receive training in surveillance, emergency response, and border awareness. Fortified borders. Using AI-assisted monitoring sensors and anti-drone systems, key border zones would be digitally secured, managed by local personnel, not foreign contractors. Critical infrastructure protection. Communications, towers, power stations, and water facilities were brought under 24/7 military and community watch, a partnership of armed forces and trained citizens. Historical education. Defense training was paired with storytelling lessons on past struggles for independence, anti-colonial heroes, and cultural resilience, passed down in classrooms and community halls. The response was immediate and overwhelming. In Ouagadougou, schools planted freedom trees, one for each of the 50 soldiers lost. In Kaya, a team of local artists painted a full-scale mural stretching 100 feet across a community wall, showing the fallen not as victims, but as defenders. In Fada, a song titled "We Will Not Kneel," featuring the voices of widows and orphans, went viral, drawing over 500,000 listens in a single week. Markets became sites of mutual aid. Women's cooperatives organized food drives, delivering grain and dried meat to newly established training camps. In the Sahel region, hunter groups offered knowledge of terrain to military teams. Blacksmiths produced ceremonial knives not for war, but as symbols of vigilance. The entire nation, it seemed, was mobilizing not with rage, but with resolve. For followers of Africa, news this moment stood out, not because it was loud, but because it was unified. Burkina Faso wasn't launching a war. It was building a defense rooted in memory, strengthened by community, and shaped by a vision of freedom that didn't ask for permission. Traoré didn't call this a revolution. He called it a remembering. And that may be the most powerful part, because this wasn't about weapons. It was about identity. In a time when many nations are told to outsource their protection, Burkina Faso was teaching its people to defend themselves with knowledge, with dignity, and with the tools of their own making. In a press address at a youth center, Traoré said it plainly: "We are not preparing for war. We are preparing to stand." The consequences of that choice are still unfolding, but already the tone of the country has shifted. No longer waiting, no longer watching, preparing. And in that preparation, a nation once seen as vulnerable has become something else entirely, a model. In the world of global security, few places have drawn more attention in recent years than the Sahel, stretching across Africa just south of the Sahara. This region has become a crossroads of competing interests: local insurgencies, foreign military bases, and untapped mineral wealth. But now something new is emerging. A model built not on external support, but internal resolve. At the center of this transformation stands Burkina Faso, a country that less than a year ago, many foreign analysts considered fragile. But the events following July 29, 2025, have rewritten that narrative. What's happening now is not just national defense, it's strategic architecture. 10 days after the attack, a quiet but historic announcement was made from the capitals of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger unveiled the Sahel Security and Sovereignty Pact, a mutual defense agreement binding all three nations to intelligence, sharing coordinated border patrols, and joint rapid response forces. This was not a headline built for fanfare. It was designed for function. Together, these three countries cover a landmass larger than Western Europe. Together, they command vast reserves of gold, lithium, and uranium, all critical in the modern global economy. And together, they now field a combined military strategy that rejects dependency and emphasizes self-sufficiency. The pact's core objectives are shared airspace control. 5 new joint air bases are being established across the region to host drone squadrons and reconnaissance missions coordinated by a regional command structure, not a foreign one. Unified equipment standards. The member states have agreed to jointly manufacture and standardize basic military equipment from communications gear to vehicles using local resources and labor. Cross-border mobilization protocols. Troops from one country can be deployed to assist another in under 48 hours during a declared emergency, no foreign approval required. Education and exchange. Military academies across the three countries are now offering joint training programs, not only in tactics, but in ethics strategy and civil-military relations. Critics abroad have called this alignment radical. But for the people living in these nations, it's simply practical. For decades, the dominant security model in Africa has relied on foreign military bases, imported hardware, and crisis response from afar. That model hasn't worked. In many cases, it's made things worse, deepening dependency, weakening local leadership, and creating the illusion of stability without addressing root causes. The Sahel Pact changes that equation. And for Burkina Faso, it's not just about protection, it's about vision. President Ibrahim Traoré has consistently emphasized that security must be cultural, not just tactical. That means not only guarding borders, but guarding the dignity and memory of a people. This is why the new defense strategy includes both drone squadrons and storytelling initiatives, both digital surveillance and community education, both readiness drills and planning freedom trees. This is where the strategy becomes truly African and deeply strategic. What makes this moment even more remarkable is the absence of any single foreign power calling the shots. Russia has offered support, yes, in equipment and training, but has not dictated terms. China has expressed interest in infrastructure development, but has not demanded allegiance. And Western nations, long accustomed to shaping defense policy in the region, now find themselves observers more than participants. In Brussels, a leaked European Union report warned that the Traoré model could inspire similar defense realignments in at least 7 other African states over the next 5 years. The concern isn't that Burkina Faso will export conflict. It's that it might export confidence, the belief that a nation can defend itself, build its own tools, and train its own people. This is the heart of the strategy. It's not just about being strong. It's about being clear-eyed, coordinated, and locally grounded. It's a rejection of what some call invisible colonization, the idea that sovereignty ends when foreign money starts directing policy. Traoré's response has been measured, but firm. Africa will welcome partnerships, but not prescriptions. And now, with the Sahel Pact gaining traction, His position is no longer just personal, it's institutional. All across the region changes are already visible. Drone patrols manufactured in Burkina Faso are now active along shared borders. Logistics hubs are being built with regional materials, not imported kits. Defense meetings among the three governments are held weekly, a pace previously unheard of in the region. For followers of Africa News, it's clear this isn't just a shift in military posture. It's a shift in mindset. The belief that Africa must wait for protection is fading. In its place, a new philosophy is rising, one that says dignity, when organized, becomes defense. Burkina Faso didn't start this journey to lead a bloc, but by refusing to kneel, it has found itself standing at the front of something larger than itself, something that may well reshape the way the world understands African power. 50 soldiers were taken in the dark, but the light that followed has refused to fade. Burkina Faso did not respond with rage. It responded with reflection and with resolve. It chose not to point fingers, but to plant roots. And from those roots has come something rare, a people standing together, not because someone told them to, but because they remembered who they are. The world will ask, is this sustainable? Can they really do it alone? But perhaps those are the wrong questions. The real question is, why should they have to? If you watched history unfold on your own soil, if you remember the civil rights marches, the Vietnam broadcasts, the voices that challenged the powerful, then you already know what this is. This is not rebellion. It is recognition that freedom without defense is temporary, that dignity without sovereignty is incomplete. Burkina Faso is not closing itself off from the world. It is inviting the world to see it as equal, not as a recipient, but as a partner. And so the question now is not for them, it is for us. If you believe that every nation has the right to shape its future, if you believe that justice is stronger when it is shared, if you believe that Africa's awakening deserves to be heard, then stand with Burkina Faso. Stand with the memory of the 50. Stand with the vision of a continent that will never kneel again.